Nova Scotia is known for its quiet coastal towns and tight-knit communities, but some cases from the province have left behind unsettling questions that remain unanswered. In this Canadian true crime compilation, we'll look at 6 disturbing real crime stories from Nova Scotia, including unsolved murders, mysterious disappearances, and cold cases that continue to haunt investigators and families. These Canadian true crime stories explore the details, investigations, and lingering mysteries behind some of the province's most chilling cases. On the morning of May 22nd, 2005, the quiet streets of Halifax were broken by a call that would change a family forever. At approximately 4:20 a.m., police responded to a report of an injured person at a residence on 6025 Lady Hammond Road. Inside, they found 32-year-old Leon Anthony Adams lying in a hallway, suffering from a gunshot wound. Paramedics rushed him to the QEI hospital, but he was pronounced dead shortly after arrival. Earlier that evening, Leon had been at home, going about his routine like any other day. Sometime after midnight, he left the residence briefly for reasons unknown. When he returned, tragedy struck. The timing and nature of the attack suggests someone may have been waiting, or had followed him, turning a normal night into a calculated act of violence. Neighbors reported nothing unusual at the time, and no witnesses saw the attacker. The crime scene offered few clues, leaving investigators with a chilling silence. The attack appeared precise, with no signs of forced entry, suggesting that Leon may have known his assailant or that the killer had planned carefully. The Halifax Regional Police immediately launched a homicide investigation, cordoning off the area and beginning interviews with family, friends, and neighbors. Every detail mattered, yet the initial hours provided no clear leads. The night that started like any other ended with a question that has haunted Nova Scotia for over a decade. Who killed Leon Anthony Adams, and why? In the hours and days after May 22nd, 2005, the Halifax Regional Police worked tirelessly to piece together Leon Adams's final moments. Detectives canvassed the neighborhood, interviewing neighbors, local businesses, and anyone who might have seen or heard something unusual in the early hours. They also spoke with friends, family, and acquaintances, trying to uncover whether Leon had any conflicts, disputes, or recent encounters that could provide a lead. Investigators quickly realized the case was complicated. There were no immediate suspects, no eyewitnesses, and no known motive. The lack of evidence made every conversation crucial, as even a small detail could be the key to solving the crime. Police examined the home for signs of forced entry, but the property appeared undisturbed, leading them to consider that Leon may have known his attacker, or that the killer had planned the act with careful precision. Over the following weeks, the investigation expanded. The police reviewed phone records, searched for surveillance footage from nearby areas, and checked for anyone in the vicinity during the time Leon left and returned to his residence. Tips began to trickle in from the public, some promising, but none conclusive. Each lead was followed thoroughly, yet they all eventually reached dead ends. By the end of the first month, detectives were facing a wall of silence. People who might have known something were unwilling or afraid to speak. The case began to gain attention in the community, as media outlets reported on the unresolved nature of the murder and the desperate search for answers. Law enforcement emphasized that any information, no matter how minor it seemed, could help identify the person responsible. The complexity of the investigation became clear. This was not a random act of violence. Every detail pointed to a calculated act, executed with planning and knowledge of Leon's movements. While the trail was cold in some areas, investigators maintained hope that someone, somewhere, held the missing piece of the puzzle that could bring justice to Leon Anthony Adams and his family. As the investigation moved into its second year, the murder of Leon Anthony Adams remained unsolved. Detectives continued to follow leads, but the trail had grown increasingly cold. Without witnesses willing to come forward or physical evidence pointing to a suspect, The case became part of Halifax's long list of unsolved homicides. In an effort to generate new information, the Nova Scotia Department of Justice added the case to the Rewards for Major Unsolved Crimes program, offering up to $150,000 for information leading to the arrest and conviction of the person responsible. Publicity about the reward aimed to reach anyone with knowledge of the crime who might have stayed silent out of fear or uncertainty. Over the years, police periodically released statements and appeals, especially on anniversaries of the murder. They emphasized that even seemingly minor details, like a person seen in the neighborhood that night, unusual vehicles, or conversations Leon may have had, could be crucial. Investigators hoped that time would encourage someone with knowledge to finally come forward. Despite these efforts, no suspects were publicly named, and the case remained officially unsolved. The community continued to remember Leon, sharing his story to keep the investigation alive and to maintain pressure on anyone holding information. His family remained in contact with police, urging the public to help and reminding the city that 20 years of silence had not erased the desire for justice. Meanwhile, detectives reviewed the case with each advancement in investigative techniques. Cold case units across Canada had begun to use forensic technology, digital records, and behavioral analysis to revisit decades-old crimes. Though details of these methods have not been publicly confirmed for Leon's case, such approaches offered a small measure of hope that one day a breakthrough could occur. Even as the case grew older, police emphasized that no lead was too small. They continued to treat the file as active, knowing that in many unsolved murders, justice can arrive years or even decades after the crime. For Leon's family, the passage of time intensified the urgency for answers and highlighted the persistent mystery surrounding his death. Years after May 22, 2005, the murder of Leon Anthony Adams remains an active investigation, now handled by specialized cold case units. Advances in forensic science have changed how police approach unsolved crimes, offering tools that were unavailable in 2005. While authorities have not publicly confirmed the use of these methods in Leon's case, techniques such as enhanced DNA testing, digital records analysis, and re-examined physical evidence provide new opportunities to uncover leads. The Halifax Regional Police continue to appeal to the public for information. Investigators stress that someone, somewhere, may hold knowledge that could solve this crime even decades later. On the 15th and 20th anniversaries of Leon's death, renewed calls for witnesses highlighted the importance of any detail, no matter how minor, from that night or the days leading up to it. Investigators have stated that sometimes small memories or overlooked observations can be the breakthrough that cracks a cold case. Over the years, theories about the murder have circulated, but police have emphasized that speculation does not replace verified evidence. What remains clear is that the killing was deliberate and targeted, suggesting the perpetrator knew Leon or had carefully planned the attack. The exact motive, however, remains unknown, keeping the case shrouded in uncertainty and leaving the community with unanswered questions. The Rewards for Major Unsolved Crimes program continues to offer up to $150,000 for information leading to an arrest and conviction. This financial incentive is part of a broader strategy to encourage people who may have previously stayed silent to come forward without fear. Law enforcement believes that as years pass, relationships change, loyalties shift, and memories may be shared with investigators who can finally piece together what happened. Even after more than 15 years, the investigation demonstrates that cold cases are never truly closed. Every lead, every tip, and every small observation is treated seriously. For Leon's family, the hope of justice remains strong, and the public's role in helping authorities is vital. The mystery of who killed Leon Anthony Adams continues to hang over Halifax, a chilling reminder of a violent crime left unresolved and the enduring search for answers. more than 15 years after May 22nd, 2005. The murder of Leon Anthony Adams remains one of Nova Scotia's most haunting unsolved cases. Despite decades of investigation, public appeals, and advances in forensic technology, the person who took his life has never been identified. The absence of answers continues to weigh heavily on his family, friends, and the community in Halifax. Leon's death is a stark reminder that violent crimes can leave lasting scars far beyond the immediate tragedy. For his family, every anniversary, every news mention, and every public appeal renews both grief and hope. They continue to cooperate fully with authorities, urging anyone with knowledge, no matter how small, to come forward. Police maintain that even information once considered trivial could now be the missing piece that leads to an arrest and conviction. The Halifax Regional Police and the Nova Scotia Department of Justice continue to treat the case as active, keeping the file under review and following any new leads. The Rewards for Major Unsolved Crimes program remains available, offering up to $150,000 for credible information. Authorities hope that financial incentive, combined with the passage of time, may encourage someone to finally break the silence. While the killer remains a ghost, the investigation is a testament to persistence. Detectives continue to analyze evidence, interview witnesses, and revisit leads with modern investigative methods. The case is a reminder that even decades-old crimes are never completely closed when law enforcement refuses to give up. For the community, Leon's murder is more than a cold case. It is a call to remember that justice delayed does not mean justice denied. The search for answers continues, and the hope remains that someone, somewhere, will hold the key to uncovering what happened that night. Until that day, the question hangs over Halifax. Who killed Leon Anthony Adams? And until someone steps forward, the mystery will remain, a chilling reminder of a life stolen too soon. On a warm summer night in late August of 1999, Jason MacCullough left a gathering at a friend's house in Dartmouth, Nova Scotia. It was a humid evening, and the air was thick with the sounds of the neighborhood. Jason had spent time with friends on Joseph Young Street, but as the night grew later, he decided to head home. He lived with his parents just a short distance away on Russell Street. The fastest way to get there was by cutting through Highfield Park, a well-worn pathway that connected Joseph Young Street to Pinecrest Drive. It was a common route, one that Jason had walked before. The area was surrounded by duplexes, apartment buildings, and basketball courts, and many local residents used the path regularly. But this night would be different. At approximately 1:30 in the morning, on August 28, Jason MacCullough was shot at near point-blank range while walking along the pathway. Residents in nearby homes heard the gunfire, followed by the sound of footsteps quickly scattering into the night. Concerned, someone called the police. An hour later, at 2:30 in the morning, officers arrived at the scene and discovered Jason's body on the path between two apartment buildings at 100 and 104 Pinecrest Drive. He was less than 6 blocks from home. Jason was only 19 years old. By all accounts, he was a kind, quiet young man who had never been involved in any criminal activity. He had no known enemies, no history of violence, and no apparent reason to be targeted. His murder appeared to be entirely senseless. Investigators arrived at the scene and began searching for evidence, but there was little to go on. Jason had not been robbed, and nothing of value had been taken. There were no immediate suspects and no clear motive. The crime had occurred in a residential area where people lived, worked, and went about their daily lives. It seemed likely that someone had seen or heard something. Yet, as the hours passed and the investigation began, one thing became clear. Jason MacCullough's murder would not be an easy case to solve. When police arrived at the scene in the early morning hours of August 28, 1999, they immediately began securing the area and collecting any potential evidence. The pathway where Jason MacCullough was found was surrounded by multi-unit housing. meaning there were numerous people living nearby. Officers went door to door, hoping to find witnesses who had seen or heard something unusual that night. Some residents reported hearing a gunshot, followed by the sound of hurried footsteps moving away from the area. However, no one had seen the shooting take place, and there were no immediate descriptions of a suspect. With no security cameras in the area at the time, police were left without crucial visual evidence. Investigators processed the crime scene carefully. The fact that Jason had not been robbed suggested that the motive was not theft. There were no immediate signs of a struggle, leading police to believe that the attack had been swift and unexpected. The location of the shooting also raised questions. While Highfield Park was a known shortcut, it was also a relatively open space, surrounded by residential buildings. The fact that someone had fired a gun in such a public area meant the killer had either acted impulsively or felt confident that they would not be caught. Over the next several days, police expanded their investigation. They reviewed Jason's background, speaking with his family, friends, and co-workers. Everyone who knew him described him as a responsible and kind young man, with no involvement in criminal activity. He was known for volunteering with local organizations and helping neighbors with everyday tasks. There was nothing in his past that suggested he had been in danger. Despite the efforts of law enforcement, there were no clear leads in the case. Without a motive or a suspect, the investigation faced immediate challenges. Police appealed to the public for information, hoping that someone who had been in the area that night would come forward. However, in the days following the murder, no new witnesses emerged. As time passed, frustration grew within both the police department and the community. Jason's family was left searching for answers, while investigators struggled with the reality that the case was already becoming difficult to solve. With no immediate leads, police turned to forensic analysis in hopes of uncovering evidence that could point them toward Jason MacCullough's killer. Officers examined the crime scene carefully, searching for anything that might have been left behind by the perpetrator. They looked for footprints, fingerprints, or any objects that could be connected to the crime. However, the results of their search were disappointing. There were no obvious signs pointing to a suspect. Detectives also considered the possibility that Jason had been followed that night. They retraced his steps from the party on Joseph Young Street to the pathway where he was killed, trying to determine if anyone could have been watching him. The distance was just over 1 kilometer, a walk Jason had taken before without any issues. Given that the shooting occurred close to apartment buildings, police believed someone in the area may have seen something suspicious. Investigators broadened their efforts by speaking with individuals who had been near Highfield Park that night. They wanted to know if anyone had noticed a person acting strangely before or after the shooting. While some residents recalled hearing footsteps, there were no clear descriptions of a suspect. With limited evidence, police considered whether Jason's murder could have been a case of mistaken identity. This theory was difficult to prove, but investigators could not ignore the fact that he had no known enemies or criminal connections. If Jason had not been the intended target, it was possible that the person responsible had mistaken him for someone else. As weeks passed, the case remained at a standstill. Law enforcement continued to urge the public to come forward with any information, emphasizing that even the smallest detail could be significant. Despite these efforts, no one provided the key piece of evidence needed to move the investigation forward. Months after Jason MacCullough's murder, the investigation remained active, but progress was slow. Detectives reviewed every lead they had gathered, hoping to find a missing connection. The lack of physical evidence made the case difficult, and without witnesses willing to come forward, police were left with few options. In an effort to generate new leads, law enforcement released composite sketches of 5 men seen in the area around the time of the shooting. These individuals were considered persons of interest, though police never identified them as suspects. Investigators hoped that someone in the community would recognize them and provide useful information. Despite these efforts, none of the men in the sketches were officially linked to the crime. A year after the murder, an unexpected development put Jason's case back in the public eye. A authorities arrested a group of men for an unrelated home invasion that had occurred just hours before Jason was killed. This crime took place only a few hundred meters from the pathway where his body was found. During the home invasion, one of the men brandished a firearm, adding to speculation that Jason's murder could have been connected. However, while the individuals involved in the break-in were charged for that crime, none were ever formally accused in Jason's case. Over time, the investigation faced new challenges. Witnesses who may have had crucial information were either unwilling or afraid to speak. Some members of the community believed that people with knowledge of the crime were staying silent out of fear of retaliation. This silence made it nearly impossible for police to confirm theories or rule out suspects. Years later, Jason's case was added to the Rewards for Major Unsolved Crimes program, offering a financial reward for information leading to an arrest. Despite this incentive, no one provided the evidence needed to solve the case. Police have continued to urge anyone with knowledge of what happened that night to come forward, emphasizing that even after decades, it is never too late for justice. As the years passed, Jason MacCullough's murder remained one of Nova Scotia's most haunting cold cases. Despite continued appeals from police and Jason's family, no one had come forward with the crucial information needed to solve the case. Investigators continued to believe that multiple witnesses were present at the time of the shooting, but the silence surrounding the crime remained unbroken. In April of the year 2005, law enforcement announced they were searching for a woman believed to have been in Highfield Park on the night of Jason's murder. They did not disclose what connection she might have had to the case, but it was clear that investigators hoped she could provide new insight. However, there was no public confirmation that she was ever identified or located. In the year 2014, former Detective Tom Martin, who had worked on Jason's case from the very beginning, stated that investigators had come very, very close to laying charges that year. However, without a witness willing to testify or provide direct evidence, the case could not move forward. The challenge of solving Jason's murder mirrored the struggles seen in other unsolved cases, where key individuals remained silent despite knowing what had happened. By the 20th anniversary of Jason's murder in the year 2019, Halifax Regional Police released another public statement urging anyone with information to come forward. They emphasized that even small details could help break the case, and they hoped that the passage of time would encourage witnesses to speak. The case remained open, and police assured the public that they were still committed to finding answers. Jason MacCullough's family never stopped seeking justice. His parents, Carolyn and Alan MacCullough, continued to speak out, reminding the community that their son's life was stolen in an act of senseless violence. They urged anyone with information to imagine how they would feel if they had lost a loved one in such a way. The murder of Jason MacCullough remains a painful mystery. His name is still listed in the Rewards for Major Unsolved Crimes program, and law enforcement maintains that solving the case is possible if the right person comes forward. Until then, his family, friends, and community continue to wait for the justice that has eluded them for so long. In late summer of 1992, Alan Kenley, Matheson, was standing at the edge of a brand new life. He was 20 years old and had just begun his first semester at Acadia University in Wolfville, Nova Scotia. For Kenley, this was a fresh start. He had left his small hometown of Glendale behind and stepped into a world filled with independence, opportunity, and plans for the future. No one around him had any reason to believe that this new chapter would become the opening lines of one of Canada's most chilling cold cases. Kenley was known by family and friends as curious, social, and adventurous. He enjoyed meeting new people and trying new experiences, which made university life feel like a perfect fit. He was close to his family, especially his younger sister, Kayreen, who was also attending Acadia at the same time. Having each other on campus brought comfort to both of them. Kayreen later said her brother was the one person she believed would always be there no matter what. That bond would make what happened next even more devastating. At Acadia, Kenley lived in Crowell Tower, a student residence filled with noise, movement, and constant activity. The first weeks of the semester passed quickly. He attended classes, settled into dorm life, and began forming friendships. To anyone watching from the outside, Kenley looked exactly like a young man finding his place. There were no known problems, no signs of distress, and no indication that he was planning to disappear or walk away from his life. During the weekend in mid-September, Kenley spent time with friends away from campus. It was the kind of trip many students took, a brief escape before returning to lectures and assignments. When he came back to Wolfville, nothing about his behavior suggested fear, danger, or concern. He spoke with his sister, made plans for the coming days, and returned to his routine. It was the last time those close to him would feel any sense of normalcy. What makes Kenley Matheson's case so unsettling is not just that he vanished, but how completely he seemed to disappear from a life that was only just beginning. He left behind his belongings, his plans, and the people who loved him most. As the days ahead unfolded, confusion would replace comfort, and unanswered questions would begin to pile up. By the time anyone realized something was truly wrong, Kenley was already gone, leaving behind a silence that has lasted for more than 3 decades. The mystery surrounding Kenley Matheson truly begins in the final hours when he was known to be present on campus. By this point, he had already settled into residence life at Crowell Tower, a place where students were constantly coming and going. Because of this, the early timeline of his disappearance would later become confusing, with small details carrying enormous weight. On the Sunday evening in late September of 1992, Kenley attended a gathering inside his residence building. His sister Kayreen saw him there and spoke with him face to face. The two made a simple plan to study together the following night, focusing on a calculus assignment. There was nothing unusual about their conversation. Kenley appeared calm, engaged, and focused on his classes. This moment would become the last confirmed time a family member ever saw him. The following day, Monday, was when the first quiet warning signs appeared. Kenley did not attend any of his scheduled classes, something that was out of character so early in the semester. At the time, no one immediately panicked. University life was busy, and it was not uncommon for students to miss a class or two. Still, it marked the beginning of his unexplained absence. That same afternoon, there was a reported sighting of a young man believed to be Kenley walking along Main Street in Wolfville. He was described as wearing casual clothing and carrying a backpack. This sighting was never officially confirmed, but it remains one of the last possible moments where he may have been seen in public. After that point, the trail fades rapidly. As evening approached, Kayreen waited for her brother to meet her for their planned study session. He never arrived. Concerned, but not yet alarmed, she and their mother tried to reach him by leaving messages on the payphone located on his dorm floor. Kenley never returned the calls. For someone who was usually reliable and close to his family, this silence was deeply unusual. Later, a critical detail would emerge involving the residence advisor for Kenley's floor. At first, the advisor told police he had seen Kenley inside his dorm room late that Monday night. Years later, he corrected this statement, explaining that the sighting had actually occurred the night before. This change shifted the entire timeline back by a full day, creating a much smaller window in which Kenley could have disappeared. When Kayreen entered her brother's room with the residence advisor, everything appeared untouched. His clothes, school materials, and personal belongings were still there. There were no signs of a struggle and no indication that he had packed to leave. It looked as though Kenley had simply stepped out and never returned. By the end of that night, a troubling realization began to take hold. Kenley Matheson was missing, and no one could clearly explain when, where, or how he had vanished. What seemed like a normal university day had quietly turned into the beginning of a long and painful search for answers. Once it became clear that Kenley Matheson had not returned to his dorm room, police were contacted and an official missing person investigation began. The Wolfville Police Service handled the case in its earliest stage. At the time, there was no immediate evidence pointing to violence or danger. Kenley's room showed no signs of disturbance, and his personal items remained behind. Because of this, investigators initially approached the situation with caution rather than urgency. Kenley was described by those who knew him as independent and adventurous. That description quickly influenced how his disappearance was interpreted. Early on, the possibility that he had chosen to leave on his own was treated as a reasonable explanation. This assumption mattered because it affected how quickly certain investigative steps were taken. The case did not begin as a potential crime scene, and valuable early hours passed without large-scale searches or public alerts. Police confirmed that Kenley's passport had not been used and that there was no activity suggesting he had traveled outside the country. His bank account showed only minor activity shortly after he was last seen, but there was no clear proof that he had personally made those transactions. Without solid evidence pointing in any direction, investigators found themselves stuck almost immediately. As days turned into weeks, Kenley's family grew increasingly frustrated. They felt the response had been too slow and feared that critical opportunities were being missed. In an effort to push the search forward, they hired private investigators to look into leads that had not been fully explored. Despite these efforts, no confirmed sightings or reliable information emerged. Eventually, responsibility for the case shifted to the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. By the time they became more actively involved, the trail had largely gone cold. There were no confirmed witnesses, no physical evidence, and no clear suspects. Each unanswered question seemed to create two more. Years later, the provincial government would officially recognize the seriousness of the case. Kenley Matheson's disappearance was added to Nova Scotia's rewards for Major Unsolved Crimes program, offering a substantial financial reward for information leading to an arrest and conviction. While this move renewed public interest, it also underscored a painful truth. By then, the case was already decades old. The early assumptions made in those first days would cast a long shadow. With no clear starting point and no solid evidence, investigators were left trying to rebuild a timeline that had never been firmly established. With the years stretching into decades, Kenley Matheson's disappearance became a case defined by questions and theories rather than answers. The lack of concrete evidence created a vacuum, and over time, speculation filled that space. Some theories were plausible, others unsettling, but none have been confirmed. One line of thought involves Kenley's visit to Corcomb's Island the weekend before he vanished. The island, a popular local spot, was reportedly visited by a man named Andrew Paul Johnson, a convicted offender linked to other unsolved crimes in the region. While no proof ever connected him to Kenley, investigators could not entirely dismiss the possibility of a dangerous encounter. The coincidence of Johnson being in the same area as Kenley has kept this theory alive in public discussion, even decades later. Another series of theories suggested that Kenley might have voluntarily left to start a new life. Over the years, there have been unconfirmed sightings across Nova Scotia and even in other provinces. A friend of a relative thought they spotted him in a nightclub, while another believed they saw him canvassing for an environmental group. Though none of these reports were verified, they fueled hope that Kenley might still be alive. Perhaps the most troubling claims arose from the 1992 disappearance itself, decades later examined in the docuseries Missing Kenley. One story came from a former Acadia University student whose family claims she confessed involvement in Kenley's death. Different versions emerged. One alleged an accident or altercation on Melanson Mountain, and another spoke of a remote farm property. Investigators conducted searches at both locations, including bringing in cadaver dogs, but no human remains were found. The individual at the center of these claims has denied involvement, and no charges have ever been laid. Despite the uncertainty, these theories shaped the public perception of the case. Each new claim or unverified sighting renewed interest, but also highlighted how fragile the trail had become. With so little confirmed information, even minor details carried weight, and every unproven lead was examined with care. By the time the case reached its 25th anniversary, in 1917, law enforcement released an age-progressed image of what Kenley might look like. It was a haunting reminder of the time lost and the persistent void left in his family's lives. The lack of closure, combined with decades of speculation, reinforced the chilling reality. Kenley Matheson's disappearance was still unsolved, and every unanswered question felt heavier with each passing year. More than 30 years after Kenley Matheson vanished, his case remains an active investigation, with law enforcement continuing to follow any credible lead. In recent years, renewed public attention has brought new developments, though none have yet provided a definitive answer. The Royal Canadian Mounted Police Major Crime Unit continues to treat the disappearance as a priority, emphasizing that even small pieces of information can be crucial. In May of 2023, a private search was conducted on Matheson Mountain, an area linked to earlier unverified claims about Kenley's disappearance. Cadaver dogs indicated an area of interest, prompting the RCMP to conduct an official site assessment the following month. Experts examined the steep and rugged terrain, but no human remains were discovered. While the search did not resolve the mystery, it reinforced that investigators are committed to exploring every possibility, no matter how long it takes. For Kenley's family, the decades have been defined by uncertainty, grief, and resilience. His mother has spoken openly about the pain of not knowing what happened, while his sister, Kayreen, believes foul play is likely involved. Over the years, the family has persevered, participating in searches, speaking publicly, and supporting media projects like the docuseries Missing Kenley. Their hope is simple: to find Kenley, or at the very least, bring closure to his disappearance. The Nova Scotia government continues to offer a reward of up to $150,000 for information that leads to the arrest and conviction of anyone responsible. Authorities stress that even seemingly minor details could prove vital. Every lead, tip, or recollection from the public remains important, reinforcing the fact that solving this case may rely on someone finally stepping forward. Kenley Matheson's story is a chilling reminder of how a single disappearance can echo through decades, leaving unanswered questions that haunt both families and communities. His case is more than a cold file. It is a testament to the love of those left behind and the enduring determination to uncover the truth. Even after more than 30 years, the hope that Kenley might be found, or at least that justice can be served, remains alive. Someone, somewhere, may hold the missing piece that finally brings resolution to this haunting Nova Scotia cold case. In January of 1992, 18-year-old Andrea King left her home in British Columbia, full of excitement and hope, for her first solo adventure across Canada. She'd been saving money for months, planning to travel coast to coast, experience new places, and meet new people along the way. Her first stop was Halifax, Nova Scotia, a city she had never visited before. Andrea had arranged to stay at a local youth hostel and was eager to explore the city's waterfront, historic streets, and vibrant culture. On New Year's Day, she boarded her flight, calling her family to let them know she had arrived safely. That phone call was brief and ordinary, but it would become the last time her family would hear her voice. Upon landing at Halifax International Airport, she made her way to the hostel, excited to settle in and begin this chapter of her journey. Everything about her trip seemed routine and hopeful, but in the quiet of the city, a series of events was about to unfold that would shatter her family's world and leave Halifax haunted by questions that remain unanswered to this day. After arriving in Halifax on January 1st, 1992, Andrea King's family expected to hear from her again within a few days. She was an organized and responsible young woman, careful to check in with loved ones while traveling. But the calls never came, days turned into a week, and the silence grew heavier with each passing day. Andrea's mother, Anne King, grew increasingly anxious. She tried calling the hostel where Andrea was supposed to be staying, but staff there told her that Andrea had never checked in. Concern turned quickly into fear as it became clear that something was very wrong. By January 4th, Anne King decided to take formal action. She reported Andrea as a missing person to the Halifax Regional Police. At first, the response from authorities was discouraging. They treated Andrea's disappearance as a case of a young adult taking an unannounced trip rather than a potential crime. This initial dismissal frustrated the family, as they knew Andrea's habits and character, understanding that she would never leave without telling anyone. Every day, without news, was an agonizing reminder of the uncertainty surrounding her fate. In the weeks following the report, the investigation began in earnest, but progress was slow. Police reached out to local airports, hostels, and transportation services, searching for records of Andrea's movements, yet found nothing beyond her initial arrival. Flyers were posted throughout the city, and local media covered the story, hoping someone might have seen her. Friends and fellow travelers were interviewed, but no new leads emerged. Andrea's absence from the hostel, combined with her lack of contact with family, created a trail that ended abruptly, leaving investigators with only questions and theories. The silence surrounding Andrea's whereabouts persisted for nearly a full year. Her family refused to give up hope, constantly pushing the police for updates and scouring the city for any trace of their daughter. Anne King even traveled to Halifax herself, distributing posters and speaking with local businesses and residents, desperate for someone to remember something small. A conversation, a sighting, a detail that might provide a clue. The sense of dread grew heavier with each passing month, and the realization that Andrea's disappearance was not a simple case of a young woman traveling alone became increasingly apparent. By December of 1992, the family and investigators had exhausted every conventional lead. The lack of information left the case in a limbo of uncertainty, with frustration mounting on all sides. Halifax, a city full of life and movement, seemed to conceal the truth behind a veil of normalcy, holding the mystery of Andrea King's fate just out of reach. It was a year marked by unanswered questions, and little did anyone know that the shocking discovery of her remains was just around the corner, ready to turn this missing person investigation into a chilling cold case. Nearly a year after Andrea King disappeared, on December 22nd, 1992, a man walking his dog in a wooded area near the Sackville Business Park in Halifax stumbled upon a disturbing scene. The location, on the outskirts of the city, yet close to bustling suburban developments, immediately caught the attention of police. Halifax Regional Police were called to the scene, and investigators quickly confirmed the worst. The remains were those of 18-year-old Andrea King. The discovery transformed the case from a missing person investigation into a homicide, raising urgent questions about how such a young woman could vanish and end up in that location without anyone noticing. The site itself was a mix of dense woods and lightly trodden paths, making it an odd place for a person to be found by accident. Police cordoned off the area and began a meticulous search for evidence, documenting the surroundings for any clues that might indicate how Andrea had been brought there. Although the body had been exposed to the elements for nearly a year, investigators still hoped that even the smallest trace, footprints, discarded items, or personal belongings, might provide a lead. Every detail mattered, as time had eroded much of the physical evidence. The discovery immediately drew media attention, and Andrea's family was notified, shattering them once again with grief and disbelief. Anne King described the moment as the realization of their worst fears, finally confirming that their daughter had not simply disappeared, but had been taken from them. The police now faced the challenge of piecing together the events of nearly 12 months prior, trying to identify potential witnesses and reconstruct Andrea's final hours in Halifax. Investigators began retracing her steps, revisiting hostels, transport hubs, and areas where Andrea was known to have spent time. They conducted interviews with locals, workers, and anyone who might have seen her during her brief stay in the city. Witness statements were sparse, and few provided consistent or actionable information. The case highlighted the difficulties of investigating a crime long after it occurred, as memories fade and evidence degrades. At the same time, forensic examinations were underway. Although DNA technology was still developing, police collected every possible sample for future testing. Clothing, personal items, and remnants found near the scene were preserved with care, in hopes that advances in technology could eventually provide answers. The realization that Andrea's disappearance had ended in murder intensified the urgency. Yet, it also underscored the challenges investigators faced with limited leads and nearly a year of lost time. As the investigation continued, it became clear that someone had intentionally brought Andrea to that secluded area. This fact shifted the focus of the investigation to individuals with potential knowledge of her movements and those with a history of predatory behavior. Halifax Regional Police maintained a perimeter of interest, interviewing known offenders and cross-referencing information from other unsolved cases. The discovery was both a breakthrough and a heartbreak. It confirmed Andrea's fate, but left an even deeper mystery. Who was responsible, and why had the crime gone unnoticed for so long? The case became a chilling reminder that even in a modern city, a young person could vanish, and crucial evidence could easily slip through the cracks. From this point onward, the investigation would focus on building connections between Andrea, her final known locations, and any individuals who might have interacted with her. The police recognized that solving this case would require patience, persistence, and an openness to new forensic methods as they developed in the coming decades. Every day brought the hope that a lead, no matter how small, could finally bring Andrea King's killer to justice. As the investigation into Andrea King's death progressed, Halifax Regional Police focused on individuals with known histories of violent or predatory behavior. One name that repeatedly surfaced was Andrew Paul Johnson, a former Halifax resident with a documented record as a sex offender. Johnson had been previously implicated in other unsolved cases, including the 1989 disappearance of Kimberly McAndrew, a young woman whose case bore some similarities to Andrea's. While police had no direct evidence linking him to Andrea at first, his criminal history made him a person of interest. By the late 1990s, investigators began to piece together more circumstantial connections. While serving time in a British Columbia prison, Johnson participated in a sex offender treatment program, which included writing exercises. One essay he produced described a fictional abduction and murder of a young woman, and the details alarmingly matched theories police had about Andrea King's disappearance and death. Though it was not a confession, it provided investigators with a disturbing insight into his mindset and possible methods. In addition to the essay, investigators discovered a compact mirror belonging to Andrea in a location associated with Johnson. The mirror became a key piece of physical evidence, suggesting he had been in possession of her personal property. Police hoped that combining this evidence with witness statements and behavioral patterns could build a strong case. For the King family, the discovery offered a glimmer of hope that someone was finally within reach of being held accountable. Despite these developments, the case remained complex. Much of the evidence was circumstantial, and the legal standards for prosecution required more definitive proof. Johnson's known history, though disturbing, was not enough to secure a conviction without a direct connection to the murder itself. Police continued to pursue every lead, re-interviewing witnesses and reviewing case files from other unsolved crimes in the region to identify patterns or overlaps. The limitations of forensic science in the early 1990s also hindered progress. While evidence such as the mirror and traces collected from the scene were preserved, DNA testing was still in its infancy. Investigators documented and safeguarded every piece of material they could, anticipating future advances that might provide a breakthrough. Over the following years, the case remained active, with detectives revisiting files, analyzing reports, and maintaining pressure on persons of interest, including Johnson. Throughout this time, Andrea's family remained heavily involved, advocating for continued attention to the case. They attended public meetings, engaged with media, and lobbied for the investigation to utilize emerging forensic techniques. Their persistence helped keep Andrea's story in the public eye, emphasizing that unresolved cases affect entire communities, and that time alone does not erase the need for justice. By the early 2000s, cold case detectives formally re-examined the evidence, hoping that advances in DNA testing could finally link Johnson to the crime. The combination of his past, the essay, and possession of Andrea's belongings made him a strong candidate for further scrutiny. However, the investigation was about to face a devastating setback that would further complicate an already difficult search for justice. The tangled web of circumstantial evidence, evolving forensic technology, and bureaucratic hurdles highlighted the challenges faced by law enforcement in solving crimes that had been left unresolved for years. Despite being a prime suspect, Johnson would not face trial for Andrea King's murder, leaving the case suspended in a state of limbo and Andrea's family still searching for answers. This moment marked both the high point of investigative progress and a new low in the ongoing struggle to secure justice. By the mid-2000s, investigators were hopeful that modern forensic science could finally provide the breakthrough needed in Andrea King's case. DNA technology had advanced significantly, and cold case detectives requested that preserved evidence from the scene, including the compact mirror and other personal items, be tested using the latest methods. The hope was that a clear genetic profile could either confirm suspicions about Andrew Paul Johnson or identify another individual connected to the crime. However, a shocking discovery derailed these efforts. When police went to retrieve the evidence from storage, several critical items were missing. The disappearance of these materials meant that the possibility of a definitive forensic link had vanished. Without this proof, prosecutors could not move forward, and Johnson, while still a person of interest due to his prior offenses and the circumstantial evidence, could not be formally charged with Andrea's murder. The loss of evidence was a devastating blow to both the investigation and Andrea's family, extinguishing a rare opportunity for closure. Despite these setbacks, law enforcement has never officially closed the case. Halifax Regional Police continue to classify Andrea King's murder as active and ongoing, encouraging anyone with information, even seemingly minor details, to come forward. Over the years, tips have occasionally surfaced, but none have led to an arrest or trial. Authorities have stressed the importance of community involvement, noting that even a small piece of information can be critical in solving long unsolved crimes. The King family has remained a steadfast presence in keeping Andrea's memory alive and advocating for justice. Anne King, Andrea's mother, has spoken publicly about the case, urging witnesses or anyone with knowledge to contact police. Her persistence has ensured that Andrea's story continues to be recognized, preventing it from fading into obscurity despite more than 3 decades passing since her disappearance. Today, Andrea King's murder stands as one of Nova Scotia's most chilling cold cases. The combination of lost evidence, circumstantial connections to a prime suspect, and the passage of time has made resolution difficult, but the case has never been abandoned. Investigators and the family alike hold on to the hope that advances in forensic science, renewed tips, or someone coming forward could finally bring answers. Andrea's story is a stark reminder of the fragility of life and the lasting impact of unresolved crime. It highlights the need for meticulous evidence preservation and continuous investigation in cold cases, and it emphasizes the human toll when justice is delayed. For her family, the absence of resolution has meant living with grief, uncertainty, and unanswered questions for decades. The Halifax Regional Police and the Nova Scotia Department of Justice have offered a reward of up to 150,000 Canadian dollars for information leading to the arrest and conviction of the person or persons responsible. This incentive, along with ongoing public appeals, aims to generate new leads that could finally unlock the mystery surrounding Andrea King's death. Andrea King's journey ended tragically, but her story is far from forgotten. The hope remains that someday, through science, witness testimony, or a long overdue confession, the case will be solved. Until then, her family, community, and investigators continue to keep her memory alive, determined to ensure that the young woman who set out for adventure is remembered, and that justice, though delayed, is never denied. For the night shift at the Sydney River McDonald's, May 7th, 1992, began like any other quiet evening. The small town of Sydney River, Nova Scotia, was known for its close-knit community and peaceful streets. The local McDonald's on King's Road was more than just a fast food restaurant. It was a place where young people earned their first paychecks, friends gathered after school, and families stopped for late-night snacks. Nobody could have imagined that, in just under half an hour, that familiar sense of safety would be destroyed. Inside the restaurant that night were employees going about their normal routines. 22-year-old Donna Warren, a shift manager and university student, was overseeing the evening's operations. 29-year-old Neil Burrows Jr., a maintenance worker and devoted father, was completing his cleaning tasks in the kitchen. 20-year-old Arlene McNeil, finishing her shift, was waiting quietly for a ride. Each of them had plans for the next day and dreams for the future, unaware that their lives were about to change forever. The danger came from within. 18-year-old Derek Wood, a newly hired employee, had spent the evening plotting a robbery. He persuaded two friends, 18-year-old Darren Muse and 23-year-old Freeman McNeil, to help him steal the restaurant's safe, promising them a fortune that did not exist. Armed with a stolen pistol, knives, and a shovel handle, the trio believed they could commit the crime quickly and escape without getting caught. Their plan relied on insider knowledge. Wood knew the layout of the restaurant, the schedules of his co-workers, and how to avoid the cameras. As midnight approached, the three young men slipped through a basement door that Wood had propped open earlier. They thought the building would be empty. But the first obstacle appeared almost immediately. Arlene McNeil and Donna Warren were still in the basement, counting money and finishing tasks. Their presence forced Wood and his accomplices to make a split-second decision. The plan for a quick robbery had suddenly become a violent confrontation, and within moments, ordinary employees would face an unimaginable threat. The ordinary rhythm of a small-town McDonald's had been shattered. In less than half an hour, a night that should have been routine would become one of the most notorious murders in Canadian history, leaving a scar on Sydney River and the families of the victims that would last for decades. As the clock neared 12:50 in the early hours of May 7th, 1992, Derek Wood, Freeman McNeil, and Darren Muse moved quietly through the basement of the Sydney River McDonald's. They expected an empty building, a fast robbery, and a quick escape, but their plan quickly unraveled when they encountered Arlene McNeil and Donna Warren. The two women were unaware of the danger, focused on their closing duties. The moment Arlene looked up and recognized Derek Wood, the situation shifted from a robbery to a nightmare. With their identities revealed, panic and cold calculation overtook the intruders. Derek Wood raised a .22 caliber pistol, aiming to eliminate witnesses before they could identify the three men. Arlene McNeil was critically wounded in the first moments of the attack. Meanwhile, Donna Warren was forced upstairs, toward the restaurant's safe. In the kitchen, Neil Burrows Jr., still focused on cleaning, was unaware of the violence approaching. He was confronted next, becoming a victim of the attacker's brutal and rapid assault. The chaos escalated when 27-year-old Jimmy Fagan, a janitor, arrived early for his 1 o'clock shift. Dropped off by a cab, he had no idea what awaited him inside. The trio saw another witness and reacted violently, taking his life before he could even enter the main area. In a matter of minutes, 3 of the restaurant's employees were dead or dying. The robbery itself proved pitifully small compared to the human cost. The intruders stole just over $2,000 from the safe, far less than the fortune they had imagined. Derek Wood then turned the weapon on Donna Warren. By the time the three men fled into the night, 4 lives had been destroyed, and the quiet Sydney River McDonald's was left as a scene of carnage and shock. In less than 30 minutes, the familiar environment of late-night routines, laughter, and casual work had been replaced with horror, confusion, and grief. The small town's sense of safety was shattered forever. The meticulous planning and sudden violence revealed the extreme danger of combining insider knowledge with reckless ambition. What started as a simple plan for easy money had spiraled into a night of devastating consequences, ensuring that the memory of May 7th, 1992, would haunt Sydney River for decades. The first signs of the tragedy emerged in the early hours of May 7th, 1992, when the next shift of employees arrived at the Sydney River McDonald's. What they encountered was unimaginable. In the main restaurant area lay Neil Burrows Jr. and Donna Warren, lifeless victims of a shocking and violent assault. In the basement, Arlene McNeil, though gravely injured, was clinging to life. Emergency services were immediately called, and paramedics transported her to a nearby hospital, where she received critical care. The Royal Canadian Mounted Police quickly arrived, securing the crime scene and beginning a thorough investigation. It became clear almost immediately that the attack had involved inside knowledge. The basement door had been deliberately left open, and there was no sign of forced entry, pointing investigators towards someone familiar with the restaurant's layout. Derek Wood, a night shift employee, quickly became the primary suspect. Witness statements and a reconstructed timeline began to place him at the center of the crime. Police focused on establishing the movements of each suspect, tracing their steps and confirming alibis. The cab driver who dropped off Jimmy Fagan helped pinpoint the timing of his arrival, narrowing the window in which the murders occurred. Investigators worked diligently to piece together the sequence of events, uncovering how quickly the situation had escalated from a robbery to multiple homicides. Within days, the evidence led to the arrests of Derek Wood, Freeman McNeil, and Darren Moose. The arrests marked the beginning of a complex legal process. Charges included multiple counts of first-degree murder and armed robbery. The community, stunned by the brutality and the inside betrayal, followed the case closely. Public attention highlighted the shock of a small town witnessing such a violent event within a familiar and trusted place. The investigation also revealed the broader impact on the victims' families. They were left grappling not only with the loss of loved ones, but also with the betrayal by someone who had been considered part of the team. The trial would later expose the chilling details of the crime, the planning involved, and the sheer recklessness that led to the deaths of 4 innocent people. The story of that night, reconstructed by investigators, became a cautionary tale about greed, trust, and the consequences of violent ambition. In the months following the May 7th, 1992 murders, the legal proceedings moved quickly, reflecting the clear evidence and eyewitness accounts. Derek Wood, Freeman McNeil, and Darren Moose faced the courts, charged with multiple counts of first-degree murder and armed robbery. Prosecutors presented a detailed account of the night, showing how Wood had manipulated his co-conspirators and how the violence had escalated beyond their original plan. Evidence included testimony from Arlene McNeil, who survived the attack, as well as witness statements and the timeline established by police. By the end of 1993, the verdicts were delivered. Derek Wood and Freeman McNeil were both found guilty of first-degree murder and robbery. They received life sentences without the possibility of parole for 25 years. Darren Moose, who had played a slightly different role in the crime, pleaded guilty to second-degree murder and robbery. He was also sentenced to life, with parole eligibility after 20 years. These sentences reflected the severity of the crime and the lasting impact on the Sydney River community. The trial exposed not only the horror of the night, but also the premeditation and recklessness involved. Court documents detailed the deliberate planning, the targeting of co-workers, and the choices that led to the tragic deaths of 4 people. Families of the victims attended the hearings, seeking justice for their loved ones. For them, the trial was a public acknowledgement of the crime's magnitude and the betrayal of trust that made it so devastating. Outside the courtroom, the town of Sydney River struggled to process what had happened. A local McDonald's, the site of the murders, reopened just a week later, a painful reminder of the lives lost. The restaurant continued operating for several more years before finally being demolished in the year 2000, closing a chapter on the physical location tied to the tragedy. The courtroom and sentencing marked a pivotal point in the story, offering legal closure but not emotional closure. For decades afterward, the families would continue to grapple with the consequences, attending parole hearings and witnessing the eventual release of some of the perpetrators. The Sydney River murders became a stark lesson in the dangers of greed and the devastating effects of violent choices, leaving a mark that would not fade from the town or its people. More than 3 decades have passed since the night of May 7th, 1992, but the impact of the Sydney River McDonald's murders is still felt in Nova Scotia and across Canada. Derek Wood remains incarcerated, serving his life sentence without the possibility of parole for 25 years. He was denied parole in 2022 after being assessed as too high a risk to reoffend. Freeman McNeil, after years in prison, was granted day parole in late 2022 and later approved for full parole in March 2024, with strict conditions preventing contact with the victims' families and entry into Nova Scotia without permission. Darren Muse was granted full parole in 2012 and now lives in British Columbia, a reminder of how justice and rehabilitation intersect in complex cases. The lone survivor, Arlene McNeil, carried the physical and emotional scars of that night for the rest of her life. She required ongoing care and support, living with permanent injuries that changed the course of her life. She passed away in 2018, decades after the attack, highlighting the long-lasting effects of violent crime on survivors. For the families of Neil Burrows, Donna Warren, and Jimmy Fagan, the murders left a void that could never be filled. They continued to bear the weight of grief and loss, attending parole hearings and advocating for remembrance of their loved ones. The Sydney River McDonald's itself was eventually torn down in the year 2000, but the memory of the murders remains vivid in public consciousness. The case is often cited in discussions of workplace violence, criminal psychology, and the importance of community vigilance. Media coverage, books, and documentaries have kept the story alive, ensuring that the victims are not forgotten. For the community, the tragedy reshaped the sense of safety in Sydney River. Once a town where late-night shifts and small conveniences felt secure, the McDonald's murders proved that danger can emerge in the most ordinary places. The story stands as a stark example of the consequences of greed, betrayal, and the breakdown of trust, showing how a moment of desperation can destroy multiple lives. The Sydney River McDonald's murders are more than a historical crime. They are a lasting lesson about human nature and the fragility of safety. Families, communities, and even the nation have learned from the horrors of that night, and the names of Neil Burrows, Donna Warren, Jimmy Fagan, and Arlene McNeil continue to be remembered. While justice was achieved in the courtroom, the emotional and societal echoes of May 7th, 1992 remain a chilling reminder of the darkness that can exist even in the most familiar places. To understand why Daniel Baker's disappearance shook Halifax so deeply, you first need to understand who he was. Daniel was 40 years old in 1997, born and raised in Nova Scotia. He wasn't a stranger to the city streets where he vanished. Halifax was home, a place he knew intimately. People who knew him described him as thoughtful and dependable, a man quietly rebuilding his life after periods of personal struggle. Daniel stood 6'1" and had a slender frame, weighing around 155 pounds. He had short, dark blonde hair, fair skin, and bright blue eyes that friends often recalled as calm and attentive. His appearance was unassuming, but he carried himself with a sense of quiet purpose. Daniel's life at the time of his disappearance had an air of stability. He had recently moved back to Halifax from Bridgewater in July of 1997, choosing to reconnect with his old neighborhood and resume work and daily routines he had long left behind. Those close to him said Daniel enjoyed the simple routines of city life. He knew his streets, the restaurants, and the small shops in his area. His move back to Halifax was not impulsive. It was a deliberate decision to rebuild a sense of normalcy. Friends and family described him as someone who valued routine, who rarely acted without thought, and who had no known conflicts that might endanger him. Even in the weeks leading up to his disappearance, Daniel's life appeared ordinary. He went to work, ran errands, and spent time with family. There were no warnings, no messages, hinting at fear or danger, and no plans to leave suddenly. That ordinary, predictable existence is part of what makes the events of December 12th so chilling. Here was a man living a normal life, familiar with his surroundings, who vanished in a way that defies logic. By looking closely at who Daniel Baker was, his habits, his personality, and his life in Halifax, we begin to see why his disappearance is so haunting. It wasn't a case of someone lost in a strange city or caught in a dangerous situation by accident. This was a man who walked out of his home for a simple, short journey and then simply disappeared. The story of Daniel Baker begins not with chaos or danger, but with the quiet, ordinary life of a man who should have been safe in his own city. The evening of Daniel Baker's disappearance began like any other Friday night in Halifax. It was December 12th, 1997, and the city was settled into the early winter chill. Daniel was at a house on Preston Street, a residential area not far from the bustling commercial stretch of Quinpool Road. Around 11 p.m., he decided to step out for a short walk to a nearby restaurant, a journey that, under normal circumstances, would have taken just a few minutes. Daniel dressed for the winter weather, wearing a black suede jacket, blue jeans, and black leather gloves. Underneath, he wore a dark blue, red, and white dress shirt, and on his feet were white Reebok sneakers. Every detail of his clothing would later become a critical part of police descriptions, as these were the last known visual records of him. The walk Daniel planned was short, along well-lit streets that would have seen some late-night foot and vehicle traffic. Preston Street leads directly to Quinpool Road, a main thoroughfare lined with shops and restaurants. Despite the late hour, the route was familiar and safe, a path he had walked many times before. Yet, within moments of leaving the house, Daniel simply vanished. Witnesses did not see anything unusual, and no disturbances were reported in the immediate area. There were no sounds of a struggle and no objects left behind that might suggest an accident or confrontation. By the time anyone realized he had not arrived at the restaurant, Daniel had already disappeared from the streets of Halifax. His last known direction was north along Preston Street toward Quinpool Road, but he never reached his destination. The suddenness of his disappearance left an immediate sense of urgency. Daniel had walked only a short distance, yet in the span of those few minutes, he seemed to disappear into thin air. The ordinary walk that evening transformed into a baffling mystery, one that left family, friends, and neighbors stunned and searching for answers. For a man so familiar with his surroundings, who was taking no unusual risks, his disappearance was as inexplicable as it was terrifying. The night Daniel vanished would mark the beginning of one of Nova Scotia's most puzzling unsolved cases, a case defined not by evidence, but by absence. The streets he walked remained ordinary, familiar, and visible, yet he was gone without a trace, leaving behind a question that would haunt the city for decades to come. Once it became clear that Daniel Baker had not returned from his short walk, concern quickly turned into alarm. His family reported him missing to the Halifax Regional Police, triggering an investigation that would stretch over decades. From the very beginning, officers were faced with an unusual challenge. There was no obvious crime scene, no signs of a struggle, and no immediate clues to follow. In the first days after his disappearance, police canvassed the neighborhood thoroughly. They knocked on doors along Preston Street and Quinpool Road, speaking with residents and local business owners. Investigators worked to recreate Daniel's final known movements, seeking anyone who might have seen him during that brief walk. Despite these efforts, every lead turned cold. Neighbors reported nothing out of the ordinary, and there were no eyewitness accounts to indicate what might have happened. Authorities also examined Daniel's personal life for possible explanations. They interviewed friends, co-workers, and family members to understand his routines, relationships, and state of mind. Daniel had no known conflicts, no unexplained debts, and no history suggesting he would voluntarily disappear. Every question answered seemed to deepen the mystery, rather than provide clarity. Police also monitored his financial activity. Unlike some missing persons cases where accounts are accessed after someone leaves, Daniel's bank accounts showed no activity. His absence from financial and personal records suggested that he did not plan to vanish. Every ordinary channel that might have offered a clue, credit card usage, phone calls, or vehicle tracking, produced nothing. Over the years, the Halifax Regional Police kept the case active. While many investigations can grow cold after months or years, Daniel's file remained open. Authorities periodically release public appeals for information, especially on anniversaries of his disappearance, hoping the time might jog a memory or encourage someone with knowledge to come forward. The investigation has been meticulous and ongoing, yet Daniel Baker has never been found, leaving his case as one of the province's most enduring mysteries. Despite decades of effort, the investigation into Daniel Baker's disappearance remains defined by absence. There is no evidence of a crime scene, no confirmed sightings since that night, and no physical trace of him anywhere along his known route. The investigation continues, relying on the hope that even the smallest detail could provide the breakthrough needed to finally answer the question, what happened to Daniel Baker? With no physical evidence or confirmed sightings, Daniel Baker's disappearance has fueled numerous theories, though none can be proven. One of the most widely considered possibilities is foul play. Authorities, including the Nova Scotia Department of Justice, treat the case as suspicious. Daniel's disappearance is included in the province's Rewards for Major Unsolved Crimes program, which offers up to $150,000 for information that leads to an arrest and conviction. This program is reserved for cases where foul play is strongly suspected, highlighting the seriousness with which investigators view the situation. Some theorize that Daniel could have encountered a stranger or been the target of a carefully planned act. The complete lack of evidence, however, makes it nearly impossible to determine what, if anything, happened that night. If someone did intend to harm him, they managed to leave no trace, no belongings, no witnesses, and no forensic evidence. It is a level of precision that has made the case particularly confounding to investigators. Another possibility considered by some is that Daniel experienced a sudden accident. Given the short distance of his walk and the urban setting, it would have to have been extraordinary for an accident to leave no trace at all. Some have suggested he could have fallen or become trapped in an area that is rarely visited, though nothing was ever found to support this. Even searches along nearby waterways and public spaces turned up no clues. A third, though less likely, theory is that Daniel chose to disappear voluntarily. Friends and family consistently report that he had no indication of wanting to leave, no plans to abandon his life, and no behavior suggesting he intended to vanish. Staying hidden for decades without using bank accounts, contacting anyone, or leaving a digital trace would have required an almost impossible level of planning. For investigators and loved ones alike, this scenario remains difficult to reconcile with the man they knew. Ultimately, every theory raises more questions than answers. If foul play occurred, who was involved and why? If an accident happened, how did it leave no evidence? And if he disappeared by choice, How could someone erase themselves so completely from public and private records? Each unanswered question contributes to the enduring mystery of Daniel Baker, a case that has puzzled Halifax for nearly 3 decades and continues to challenge investigators today. Nearly 3 decades have passed since Daniel Baker vanished on that December night in 1997, yet his disappearance continues to resonate deeply with his family and the Halifax community. For his loved ones, the absence of answers has been a source of lasting grief. Each year brings the same questions, the same uncertainty, and the same hope that someone, somewhere, may finally provide a clue. The city itself has not forgotten him. Daniel's case is frequently cited in discussions of unsolved disappearances in Nova Scotia, and his story has become part of the local consciousness, a reminder of how suddenly a life can be interrupted and how mysterious the world can sometimes be. Law enforcement continues to maintain the investigation as active, releasing appeals for information and updating public notices to keep awareness alive. The $150,000 reward, offered through the Rewards for Major Unsolved Crimes program, remains available, emphasizing that authorities are still seeking leads. Investigators stress that even the smallest piece of information, something that may have seemed insignificant at the time, could be crucial in finally solving the case. The continued efforts demonstrate a commitment to finding justice and closure for Daniel and his family. While decades of investigation have produced no definitive answers, the hope persists that the truth will one day emerge, whether through new evidence, a witness coming forward, or a chance discovery. The story of Daniel Baker is far from closed. His disappearance is a reminder that some mysteries endure, haunting communities and families for generations. Daniel Baker remains missing, and his story is a quiet but powerful testament to the unresolved nature of many disappearances. The search for answers continues, fueled by the determination of law enforcement, the vigilance of the public, and the enduring love of those who have never stopped hoping. Until the day the mystery is solved, Daniel's absence serves as a stark reminder of the fragility of life and the enduring need for answers in the face of the unknown.